Vicky Linnane and welcome to Embrace Therapy podcast. I am a practicing art therapist based in Ireland. In each episode, I will interview guests from various fields of therapy and well-being with the aim to encourage healing through embracing therapy.
So, welcome Sineád Keating. It's so nice to have
you.
And it's a real treat for us and like everyone that's listening because, so far we've had like people who sit one side, and I'd love the approaches that like we've kind of had someone who's a counsellor, who's, a transformational coach and, therapist. But it's so nice to hear the other side because the client's story isn't awfully like present. It's kind of in one sense it's just like unheard of, really. So it's really
nice
to get the perspective. And thank you so much for always for people that don't know you, Sineád Keating has been on the Pat Kenny show. She's been in the Examiner and she's been in the Independent, and her story is so inspiring, and it's just a wonderful thing that you're doing. You're a really strong advocate for mental health, so well done.
Thank you, that's lovely. I'm not very good at always recognizing that, because it does feel quite self-indulgent sometimes to talk about my personal experience, because my personal experience of mental illness is always with me, like it's always in my head. So and I often feel selfish about that in my home life. So because mental illness is such a big thing, so it is a huge presence in home life. So then when I talk about it in public, I often feel like it's even more self-indulgent to be chatting about myself. But then actually everything I've done, every interview I've ever done, I always have heard back from somebody who heard it and said like it really sat with me, or that's similar to my experience, or I didn't know that. And I always think if one person hears it and feels less alone, because that's how I feel when I hear other people talking about bipolar, which is my personal experience, I always feel less alone. So if I think if one person has heard it and feels less alone, or if one person learns something new, my job's done. And that makes me feel great. So then that reminds me that personal experience is so important. And yeah, it's just a really important part of any mental health conversation.
Yes, well said. It is a two-way conversation, yet somehow along the way the platform has been given more to the health practitioner and the therapist, which is sad because such a big opportunity is missed then. But I think it's down to the cultural kind of societal, like systemic situation that there is, that we don't talk about that. So there's always still stigma there. We're doing a lot of work to kind of break down the stigma, and you especially, and all the advocates absolutely do that. We're breaking it down piece by piece, but it's still there. Like, it's definitely still there.
I suppose just when you were saying that, I was thinking that I don't know. I think with the advocacy work I do, I feel like my voice is always heard. But then I often reflect on the fact that I'm quite articulate, and I know I don't come across as quote unquote like the typical ill person, which is an idea that doesn't exist really. But I think when it comes to especially like media interviews and stuff, or like a wider society perception of mental illness, it can seem that there's a stereotypical idea of somebody with mental illness, and it's very othering. And I just often hear, God, you don't come across as ill. And I will think, well, what did you think illness looked like? It can happen to anybody. It's just like any other illness. So yeah, I don't know. I feel a bit like caught. Do I think lived experience is centered yet in a wider conversation, or is it not? But yeah, I think maybe we're getting there with lived experience, and how how voices are heard more in a wider context, and hopefully that will continue.
Yeah, definitely. I'm very hopeful for that. Yeah, so you mentioned there a little minute ago about home life and kind of, I wanted to bring that in a little bit. So you are, at the moment at home because you're on maternity leave.
New mom, yeah.
And, I'm just thinking now you have this perspective of being a parent as well as, the person that you were before, in the mental health kind of, I suppose what I'm trying to say is you have two perspectives now of the system. And I think there's something that shifts in us when we become parents. And maybe even just, looking back at you when you were 11 and how you felt then, and now looking back maybe even in the eyes of a parent, I wonder about you thinking about you as a child,
As a child, I know. I think about that a lot because I feel like I've always been just trying to get back to before I was 11, because I had my first episode when I was 11 and it felt like everything just went downhill after that until I was in my late 20s. I feel like I've always been trying to get back to childhood, but it's what you were saying about having that perspective or feeling like a new person as a parent. I don't feel that, interestingly, and maybe I will. I think because my twin girls are only 4 months, I feel like I'm still growing in terms of my perspective of myself. But as soon as they were born, I still felt like my old self. It was just that I suddenly had responsibility for two tiny people. In terms of mental health, I think a lot about when they're older. I think about their own mental health because they're probably biologically more prone to maybe having mental health difficulties themselves, because I do. And because bipolar in particular runs in my family in generations further back. And I think about how I will deal with my mental illness with them as they grow. So, but that's not a problem for now. I think I feel very much in a particular experience at the minute, where I'm developing. So I'll probably have a different perspective on this period of time later on. But right now, I do feel like my old self. I just have two new people. But then I didn't start to love them until about a month ago. And that was tricky, and I got such good advice before they were born. Somebody had said to me, you might not love them for a while. And also, look, for the first 6 months, everybody fed, nobody dead. And I thought, I'm just so glad now that I got that advice, because then when I felt very bonded to them when they were born, but I don't think I really loved them until they were about 3 months old. And that all fed into my mental health. So I did have a breakdown, for want of a better word. I don't know if I ever come up with a better word. That's an alternative for breakdown. Breakthrough. It definitely didn't feel like a breakthrough. Maybe it will in the future, but it definitely felt like a breakdown when they were 10 and a half weeks. And that was all. It was a slightly different experience to my previous episodes, in the sense that it was just all down to sleep deprivation, which is dangerous with bipolar. And I knew that it was dangerous, and I'd had a 2-year preparation for becoming pregnant, and I had a lot of mental health care during pregnancy and after they were born. So I logically knew that it was going to happen, but then when it happened, it was awful in a way that I hadn't experienced before. But I don't really associate that with being a new mum. I associate that with having bipolar.
Sure,
if that makes sense. It felt more like my illness was more present than before they were born, because all my avenues of self-care suddenly I couldn't do because I just didn't have the time. So mental illness and new parenthood, they've been fighting each other a little bit. But I would say generally I've been quite lucky. in how I've managed and the care that I have. But I was reflecting on my maternity mental health care before we sat down to chat, because maternity mental health care it's changed in Ireland in the last few years. When myself and my husband decided that we wanted to try and have children, 2017 I think, or early 2017, we went for a consultation with a perinatal psychiatrist in the Rotunda. And I think there were only 3 perinatal psychiatrists at the time in Ireland. But by the time I was pregnant and I went to the Coombe, there were more psychiatrists in the Coombe than there had been in Ireland, which is great. But all the maternity, like all the perinatal mental health care is psychiatric. There wasn't any therapy involved. And I realized after they were born how much that was missing. So I went back to therapy last week, and that's been great, because in psychiatric care is very important for me anyway. That is probably not the case for everybody who has even the same illness as me. But I think that mental health care has to be rounded. And I think therapy is, even though I don't do therapy all the time, and I hadn't done it for a few years, but I'd done it for a long time before that, it's very, very important having a space to tease everything out, because I realized in parenthood I was having all these symptoms which are typical of my experience bipolar anyway, like high anxiety, and my mood was cycling, and my brain functions too quickly, so everything just becomes quite blurry, and I can't concentrate, and I become overwhelmed really easily. And in a psychiatric environment, you can talk about there's a space to talk about the symptoms, but I'm a whole person, so they will inevitably feed into and be inextricably linked with just normal worries that I have, and things that would impact any person, regardless of being a new mum or not. And there's not the space to talk that out in a psychiatric consultation, even though my consultant is wonderful and I feel very safe with him. And I just realized how much therapy was missing, and I'm so glad I went back, because I need that space. And I really think everybody should do therapy, whether you have a mental illness or not. It's so important.
So you have taken a holistic approach kind of to your mental health regime and your self-care. You kind of take an umbrella approach, like you get everything in. So like you definitely think psychiatry is something that you need, but then again you need to talk it out with somebody too. So I'm
definitely
curious to know, like, what is your positive and negative experiences so far in regards to talk therapy?
Really mixed, I would say, because I've had a lot of therapists over the years, because I've been doing it for over 20. It's marginally more positive than negative, but because I have that experience now, and because I think just with the benefit of being that bit older, because I'm in my 30s, I would recognize very quickly now if I didn't have a good fit with the therapist, and I wouldn't mind saying to somebody, I don't feel this is a good fit for me. That's very different. That was very different when I was 20 and really sick. I wouldn't have had the confidence to say to somebody, I don't feel this is working, or I feel very unsafe. I've had therapists who are beyond wonderful, so safe and just so personable, and who have maintained very appropriate boundaries whilst not having a wall. And there is such a big difference between having a healthy boundary and having a wall. And I think for me, if a therapist has a wall and they feel in any way uncomfortable, that's instantly recognizable, and it just will shut down how much I want to share. And it's really important when you have any mental health difficulty. I think this isn't just for me, it's for anybody. It's really important that you feel you can share absolutely anything, not just for yourself, but because I think a therapist is there to safeguard you as well. And so they need to know if there's something to worry about. So you can have that support of somebody saying, I think you're not okay, or maybe you're you're in a worse place than you think you are. So you need to have that safe environment, and I haven't always had that. I had one when I got very sick, and I, for the first time, just after my diagnosis, this is 2008, I went to see a therapist, and I could see that she was actively taken aback by some things I was saying to her. And that was awful. It was quite unnerving, because then I thought, oh God, like, are the things I'm saying really shocking, or, is there something really wrong with how I feel or how I'm thinking, or, and you're on the road then to what's wrong with me. And that's really unsafe. She did empty chair therapy with me. So I was talking about a particular person. I'd had a really difficult friendship breakup that had happened really because I had become unwell, and this friend didn't or just wasn't able to deal with it, and so ghosted me. And we'd had a very sudden friendship breakup, which was very traumatic for me. And I'd spoken about this because it was quite fresh with this therapist, and she didn't tell me what she was going to do. And she said, close your eyes and think about what you want to say to this person, and now open your eyes. And the chair was empty. She said, say it. And I just completely broke apart. I was not ready for that. Looking back now, I was clearly not in the space for that. I just needed at that time to have a place where I could go and just cry for an hour. And I realized later on how unsafe that was. And that was probably my worst negative experience in therapy. And then I've had therapists who are just magnificent, who haven't had the wall, who've just hugged me when I needed to. Or I had one therapist who just saw where I was and just got up and dragged her chair across the floor and just sat beside me so she could hold my hand. I could cry talking about it. It was so powerful and exactly what I needed. And those are moments that just make you feel like it's just pure empathy. And that's everything, I think, in therapy. To feel like you're safe and to feel like somebody gets it, and that your feelings make sense.
To be heard, and for it not to floor somebody. Do you know what I mean? Like that, that's really not safe. We kind of use the word container. So the container and the boundaries of that are very important. And then the relationship as well. So you kind of spoke about it so brilliantly there. It was so clear. I suppose I've had an experience as well with a therapist. I think I mentioned her on a podcast before, Leora Soto. Such a big fan of hers. But the experience I had with her is that she cried with me.
Oh.
And I, honest to God, like, it was just transforming. It just solidified everything I felt about my journey as an art therapist. I was like, yes, this is the approach. And I didn't think this was allowed, but it made my experience so valid and so seen and so felt. It was just so
totally
human level. And it was just, it was transformational. Like, it really pushed me forward in my career. It just felt like a wind through my sail. I was just off, and, it was really, really profound. And like that therapist coming over and holding your hand, it just says buckets that nobody can verbalize. It's just, it says it all.
Oh yeah. Like this isn't related to mental illness at all. Just for anybody who's going through a difficult experience, it can feel so insular, and you can and there's so much shame that can come with having any kind of traumatic experience, and you need to feel like somebody gets it, and that it's a universal experience, because all experiences, I think, really are universal, because they'll impact many, many more people than you. Even more rare experiences and more severe experiences, there's going to be lots of other people in the world who experience the same thing, and you need to feel like you're not complete alien in what's going on. That's so lovely for a therapist to cry, if that's what they feel. And so you see that and can feel that level of empathy. That's just amazing.
It was so authentic, and I think authenticity is something that, it can't be thought. And when you're down and you're doing your training as a therapist, it's like, it's not even mentioned, you know? So it's
authenticity.
like, yeah, like, you know, it's always about the empty vessel, being the container, just the holding space. But there's no mention of you being authentic in that moment, being present in that moment. That's very, very small. And it's not really something I've come across. So
That's fascinating.
Yeah, I think it's such a big part of it. It might be touched on by the likes of Carl Rogers, like a particular therapist that talks about the relationship more so than any theory. You know, it's beautiful, really. But kind of getting off a little bit there with my rants. So
You weren't ranting at all.
I'm curious as well, like, you know, have you ever, or do you, you know, lean on the arts in your self-care? Like, you know, obviously I'm coming from a creative arts therapist, an art therapist background. I'm wondering if the arts play a factor in your, I suppose, your self-care.
I wonder how wide you describe the arts.
Yeah, no, it can be wide. Yeah.
The arts are very, and creativity, I suppose that's the word I think of, creativity, which I didn't used to think of myself as creative at all. In fact, I actually thought I was not creative because I can't draw. Isn't that bizarre?
Oh.
And then I was in psychiatric hospital, and one of my fellow patients, we were having a chat and we were chatting about hobbies, and I said, well, I bake and I knit and I write, and I used to do a lot of singing. I really enjoy that. And she just looked at me and she said, I think you must be the most creative person I've ever met. And it's just that one comment completely changed my perspective on creativity. And I thought, oh yeah, it's not just drawing. I don't even know where I got that idea. But yeah, writing, be it like writing fiction or journaling, even though I haven't had the headspace to do it since my girls were born and throughout pregnancy, because my brain was mush. But in my life generally, very important. So important for me to bake and cook. So now, like, they're things I can do kind of mindlessly. I love knitting, especially coming into this time of year, knitting and sewing. My sister's just started to do quilting. She made my girls beautiful quilts, and I just can't wait to learn how to do that. Doing anything that's creative, I think, is so important. Brene Brown talks about creativity being a trait that everybody has. And I think some people genuinely think, like I had, think of themselves as not creative. And Brene talked about it in a way that really resonated with me. And she said that creativity, it has to be used or it will turn into something negative. You know, like anger. It has to come out in some way. And so you need to do something creative really to let out that side of yourself. And it's just so important to be able to do things that are creative, to feel like you're making something new and get lost in yourself for a little bit in a way that's more mindful than what's the word I'm looking for? Like analytical. I feel like I'm analyzing myself all the time with my mental health, and sometimes you just need to do something that's soothing and that doesn't require like active conscious thought. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I completely get you. And there's something about you know, it can be used sometimes, like those art therapy coloring books. I remember they came out, and a lot of art they were like,
love those.
They were very negative about it because they were like,
really?
Oh my God, how dare they say that that's art therapy? That is not art therapy. But for me, I was able to separate. I was able to say to myself, you know, there's so much healing in giving yourself the time to look, you know, at like some creativity, to give yourself time to like get lost in the coloring, which is very zen.
I love it. I love doing those. Absolutely. And I had them in hospital, and they were amazing.
Yeah. So
because you need to be able to distract yourself.
Exactly.
At times.
So they're part of, I suppose they're a branch of art therapy, but art therapy is so wide, you know, the whole tree is not there. So people were getting a bit upset about the idea that they were called art therapy. coloring books. So, but like, it was just a name giving to them. They are art and it's therapeutic. So I didn't see any issue with it. And speaking about like the art therapy side of it, have you ever been to a creative arts therapist or an art therapist? Have you experienced in that way?
Do you know, I've done it twice. Once with you at your groups, and that was really, it was really vulnerable for me, but in a way that's really great. And I had done it once before. I had never thought of art therapy before a few years ago, because I'm very verbal, and I've never had any difficulty in finding words to describe how I feel. And so that has never been like a barrier in therapy. And I think that thinking things through so that I have words for things has been quite central to coping for me. And I'd never thought of art therapy as something that sat with me. And then I was doing a course, it was like a post-hospital course that I did maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And just one of the sessions that we were having was art therapy. Because it was part of the course, I was going to be automatically doing it. And I went into it thinking, this is probably not for me, but like, give it a go. Even though I like that I felt vulnerable because I can't draw, which is totally not the point, but like, you don't, well, I didn't realize that. And so I really sunk into it. And at the end of it, I had drawn this like collage of colors, and I realized that I didn't even know I was feeling like that day. And I thought, oh, I see. It was like connecting with it was just connecting with a different level within me that wasn't verbal.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was quite, I suppose I was having quite dark feelings that day, so it was quite a dark, I want to say picture. I don't know, is that the right word for what I did? But yeah, it was really revealing to me. And the therapist we had done a 2-minute mindfulness with us before, to try and get into that space. And I just realized how important non-talking therapies can be, especially for people who find it difficult to articulate themselves. And I think, like, I'm so long dealing with my mental illness that I'm quite practiced at it, and I have a lot of experience in dealing with it. And then when I meet other people who maybe have the same illness as me, or even a different mental health issue, if they're experiencing it, particularly in adulthood for the first time, it can be really difficult to put words on how you feel. And yet your feelings are within you. They're there somewhere. And so, we don't all just fit into the same box. There has to be different types of avenues available for people to get out how they're feeling. And maybe you move on to a different type of therapy later on if you can put words on how you're feeling. But I think it's so important to have a variety, because we're not all the same. We don't all have the same experiences. And even if we do have the same illnesses, we won't always have the same reaction to it, or it won't show up in the same way in our lives, because we're all different people with different DNA and different hobbies and interests and different personalities. And so we have to have different ways of supporting people. Mm-hmm. And so I think art therapy in that way is so central to what should be available.
Yeah, absolutely. And
especially publicly.
I know, absolutely, yeah. And the thing is, there nearly is an art therapist in every town now. Do you know, like, there's a lot of us now, and definitely in every county. But
that's amazing.
Yeah, it's really good. There's something there that I really want to touch on a little bit. Like, I remember before you said, like, I'm always trying to get back to that time when I was kind of younger, like even before the age 11, I'm always trying to get back to my childhood. And
yeah,
yet, like, that for me was an experience that I had through art therapy, is the pre-verbal, even like the times when I couldn't articulate. I really attuned into that. I I went somewhere in the art that I could never go to with words, because it was completely different space, a different realm in me. And it is that unveiling, and you know, I think art does that really well. And then of course, like, you know, there's different, like you said, like, you know, maybe for 5 years you might talk it out, and then you might go a little bit deeper going into art therapy, going to kind of ages where you might look at, like, you know, ages 10 down to 5, and you kind of might do a bit of work around that. And then for me, I remember I went to a dance movement therapist, and it was so, like, such a rich experience, because it meant that I was in my body for someone who hasn't been really in my body in a long time, because of the training and everything. It's very heady, you know, when you're in college, you know, you know yourself, it can be hard. But getting back into the body and really feeling and leading the way with my body, I found it very revealing of kind of old habits and stuff like that. So maybe unhealthy habits that I might have kept or whatever, or holding anxiety somewhere in my back, or even you know, the tenseness that you might feel in your shoulders and stuff, but kind of into to anxiety, and like the stomach as well. And I know for you definitely had recognized some anxiety in your stomach, and that led you down a road as well, you know.
That's what led to my diagnosis. That I had like really intense like bowel pains, and I went to the GP. I didn't know what was wrong, but I probably thought I was dying, and my bowel was inflamed and I had a kidney infection, and she just happened to say to me, you know, like, anything bowel related can often be linked to stress. And I was like, oh my God, I'm so stressed. It was like a little light bulb went off in my head. And that's what led me then to going on to the therapist, who said that I probably should go to see the psychiatrist. And that's what led to my diagnosis. Anxiety shows up so much in the body. I don't know if I've ever met anybody I don't know how it's not possible for anxiety not to show up in the body in some way. Like my back will hurt, and my stomach will be in bits, and my jaw, I'll lock my jaw, and it just gets so painful. And I think if you are able to learn to tune into your body, you can catch anxiety, maybe before you can catch it in your head. But it was interesting just what you were saying, just about like therapy and childhood and getting back to childhood. I really wish something like art therapy or play therapy or dance therapy had been there when I was a child. I mean, I went to see a psychologist for the first time when I was 11. I had that first episode. But we talked a lot about the symptoms. I mean, I couldn't have been diagnosed with bipolar at that age anyway. But we talked a lot about the symptoms, and I don't know, did that experience do anything for me other than normalized therapy, which was extremely important. But I wish that there had been a more creative therapeutic outlet for me then, because I think in childhood, when you're still learning to grasp language, and you know, there are far more pertinent words to describe how you feel with a mental health difficulty than, you know, sad, angry, happy. Language is so nuanced, and there are so many different words that you have to be in touch with to be able to accurately talk about how you feel, that when you're in childhood, it might be possible to a certain extent. And I was still very articulate when I was 11, but definitely something creative would have been so supportive for me, and I think would have just had a different, much more impactful space.
Yeah, because you could be told, oh, I wonder, like, could you show me with your body what that feels like? Or could you pick a color that maybe represents what that is? Or maybe, you know, with these toys here, like maybe you could act it out, or, you know, there's definitely other ways. And that's the beauty of it. And absolutely, there's so much work there to be done with children. And it's funny, it's like giving them the awareness and the tools to kind of heal themselves, but also know going forward that, oh, I need these, you know, I need these regulated kind of things, like, you know, it might be the yoga ball. I might need to bounce a little bit before I go to school. I might need to sit in the rocking chair and rock a little bit after school.
I was just thinking that as you were talking, I was just thinking about how important it is, not just for like that time that you're doing maybe art therapy with a therapist, but going forward, that it's introduced a different method of coping for you that you can do by yourself. You have to be shown those things in childhood. Like I learned all those things in my 20s, and even now self-care like that is very counterintuitive, and I have to catch that thought and think, no, self-care isn't selfishness. I need to do this for myself. I need to take care of myself in this way. But if children can be taught that there are creative outlets to deal with how they're feeling, they're skills that can become very intuitive, and I think can only lead to being able to cope better in adulthood.
Yeah. So there's this guy that I've definitely talked about a lot, and actually I think pretty much in every podcast, Dr. Dan Siegel. He's in the States, in California, but he's written a book about the whole child approach, and it's exactly that. Like, it's just wonderful to bring in all the things that we can possibly help it, like a child, and to look at the whole child. So the nervous system, being aware of what makes their I can't remember the name.
Their prefrontal cortex.
Yeah, prefrontal cortex, and like what makes that fire off, like, and like basically what is their triggers, and he does it in such a beautiful language. It's so easy to understand, even from age 4 and 5. You can get what's going on in me, and then you can get what's happening in the body then because of that. And like you said, if you can get attuned to your body and become aware of it, it is the natural way of helping yourself. Okay, maybe I need to cycle it out now, or maybe I need to go upstairs and do a bit of meditation or mindful breathing, and it is that. And that's, I honestly think there's no age that you can't start this. It is like,
I definitely agree.
By co-regulation, by modeling awareness, by modeling, your own regulation, even just yourself feeling like, even this, like you're holding your twins, putting on headphones and listening to music keeps you happy if you're not happy to hold them, and they're getting regulated by feeling your heartbeat. And when do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like
I have done that. They'd be crying, and I'm like, I can see that you're crying. So maybe if I can just take away hearing that you're crying, I can keep my sanity. and I felt awful about it at the start, and then I thought, no, because they're safe and I can see that they're upset, and I can still, comfort them, bounce them or hold them or whatever it is that they need. But like listening to crying is really, really awful. And it does really set me off, as it would anybody. But I was thinking, just what you were saying, I was thinking about, I've been thinking about how I manage my self-care in relation to that, modeling to my girls, because I know that they're going to learn how to take care of themselves, not by how much I take care of them, but by watching how much I take care of myself. That is absolutely how they are going to learn to look after themselves. And in a way, I would never say I'm grateful for my illness, because it's awful, but I am very grateful. Pardon?
It's your superpower.
Well, I definitely, I've heard other people talk about their illnesses as a superpower. I'm like, oh, listen, that does not resonate with me at all, because an illness is an illness, and it's really horrible. I really wouldn't wish it on anybody. It's a dreadful experience. But I'm very grateful for what having my illness has taught me. It definitely brought out the best in me, in terms of how I approach it, in terms of the values that I have and how I want to deal with it, in a way that's very authentic for me. Like I'm very open about it, and that's just what suits me, and that is not something that is looked on as wise. I have had a lot of people say, I don't think you should really talk about it, maybe, keep it private. But for me, that wouldn't be private, that would be secret, and that's not healthy. And privacy is a great thing if that's what you want to do about your own mental health, but that doesn't suit me. And so it's been really important for me to be open about it. And I want my girls to see me deal with it in the way that I want, in the way that feels best for me. And I think children, if you introduce self-care, just introducing something that will make their lives better. So that's what I can't protect them from any mental health difficulties that they might have, and I can't protect them from me being sick. Like, they're going to see me sick at some point. And it's important for me that they know that I have an illness, and they know that, you know, mummy is sick sometimes, but that it's not their responsibility to deal with it at all. It's my responsibility, and I have my husband, but that they can see that looking after me is important, and that they will learn that. And I think it is exactly what you said, that you can embed that for them very early. It's not something that you wait until, like, you know, they're 7 or 8. They're going to see that as soon as they, you know, as soon as they can recognize what I'm doing, they will see that. So yeah, I feel in that way, I'm grateful for what my illness has taught me. I'm grateful that for all the learning that I've done since, and I'm grateful that I've had the willingness to do that, because, like I said, it was counterintuitive. So I'm glad that it's taught me a lot about myself, and it's probably going to make me a better parent.
You're here, absolutely. It can only be an additional part of you, and it can only be a positive in that way. There's so much learning in it, and it's great that they have someone who is, you know, grateful, you know, which practicing gratitude, you know, is another practice, you know, it definitely.
And it's so important. I was only thinking the other day that they're, at the moment, for me, the day they were born, I wouldn't call it the happiest day of my life, which I think probably sounds sacrilegious to most parents. But, like, pregnancy was awful, and their birth was semi-traumatic for me. I had a C-section, and that was not a good experience. And it was marginally more positive than negative, because they were born and they were so well, and they were born in lockdown, and my husband was able to be there, which was great. But the day they were born is far and away the most grateful day of my life. And I think I think gratitude is not often seen as important as happiness. And I definitely think it is. I think gratitude is maybe the most important. Yeah. It's certainly the most important practice. Yeah. I was so overcome with gratitude. I'd had a pregnancy was awful for me, but they were so well. And even within lockdown, like, and we couldn't have any visitors, like, they were just so good. Even though, you know, when a baby cries, it's not that they're bad, but they were just good as gold for those 3 days that it was just the 3 of us in hospital together. And I even though I was having a difficult time, I just was thinking, I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful that they're well. I'm so grateful they're here. I'm so grateful we can go home after 3 days. And that gratitude in all difficult experiences, I think, just, it's not that it makes it better, but without gratitude, it's definitely worse.
Yes. Yeah, I hear you. I think, you know, there's a lot to be said about, you know, when you feel joy or when you feel happiness, that you're always going to be thinking about the fall from it. And it's something about practice gratitude. You don't really concentrate on that fall. You concentrate on the things that are making you happy and taking count for them. And then it's like this noticing that happens again and again. And it can be such a small thing, you know, like, you know, grateful for my new pajamas, you know, that even such a small thing, but it brings so much comfort to you, and just recognizing it for what it is.
Oh, the first day I left them was I dropped them off at my family, even though we were in lockdown. So we'll say that we had gotten the health advice,
Yes.
that we could accept help. So we had one household that we were like integrating with. So I'd left them with my family, and I went to IKEA because I needed to get furniture, and I had to stand in a queue for like an hour and 20 minutes. And I just was standing there in this queue thinking, this is not typically what I would feel grateful for. I was just so grateful. I was so grateful to be by myself and just to have this time to like look at, YouTube and just have a breather. And gratitude is just so mindful because it keeps you in the moment. And that really does help, I think, offset the worries about the future. Because it is that thing that when you worry, you suffer twice. And it's not possible always to offset worry, but I do think that gratitude can help ground you in a particular moment. And it makes such a difference.
Well, I'm so grateful to have you on the podcast, and there's so much that we didn't get to talk about, so I feel like we need to have you on again. So
oh please, I would love that.
Yeah, we're definitely having you on again, because there's so much that we need to talk about, and I think it's a real treat for all the listeners, to have you talk about your experiences so eloquently. And it's such a vulnerable place, talking about your own experiences, and I'm just delighted that you're able and happy to do that. So it's a real joy to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me, and equally I am so grateful to have this time with you. It's been so wonderful just to chat to you. It's always great to chat to you, but it's just so lovely to have this space, particularly in lockdown. And it's so hard. I find it so hard. I know everybody else is, and it's just so nice to be able to chat about things that are so on my mind about myself. But when I chat about myself, it is like two-way empathy, because I know that there's people who will hear it, be like, yeah, I feel crap about lockdown, or I'm having a hard time motherhood, or I have bipolar, and I feel that when I talk about it with other people. So I really appreciate you having me on.